Hello everybody and welcome to today's Edureka session on C# interview questions. So I'm going to be talking about top 50 most frequently asked interview questions in C# programming language. So this is how I have categorized the questions. So I'm going to be starting off with the beginner level interview questions, further which I will be increasing the complexity and then talk about the intermediate level questions, and then I'm going to end this tutorial by talking about advanced level interview questions asked in C# programming language. So I hope you guys are clear with the agenda. Alright guys, so before I start off with my questions, let me just give you a small briefing about what is C#. Well, C# is a simple, modern and a general purpose object-oriented programming language which was developed by Microsoft under its .NET framework back in 2000. So I hope you're clear with this small briefing. I'll immediately start off with my questions. So my first question says, list down the differences between public, static, and void keywords. So the answer to this is, let me start off with the static keyword. So it is a keyword used for declaring a member of a type, which is specific to that type. All right. Now I'll be talking about the void keyword. So void keyword simply states that the method does not return any value. And when I talk about the public keyword, or also known as the access specifier or an access modifier, states that the method of a class can be accessed publicly. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says define C# and list the features. Well, C# is an object-oriented, type-safe, and managed language which was developed by Microsoft under its .NET framework back in 2000. Now, the idea was that it will be used in the development of all kinds of software aiming at different platforms like Windows, web, mobile, using only one programming language. Fast forward to the present day, it is one of the most popular and widely used programming languages. It is used by millions of developers, and also it is used for building all kinds of software. Now let me talk a bit about the features of C# programming language. So, well, I have listed a few features in my slides which are easy to grasp. Since it's an object-oriented programming language, most of the things are dealt in classes and objects, makes use of constructor and destructors. It's a general purpose language. It follows a very structured approach, and it is platform independent for compilation. Let me move on to the next question, which says list down the reason behind the usage of C# language. Well, there are several reasons for the same, but some of them are listed below that are given in my slides. It's easy to pick up since the syntax is very easy to grasp. It's a component-oriented language which follows a very structured approach. The code readability becomes very easy, and it also produces very optimized algorithms. Passing parameters in this programming language is also really easy, and once written, it can be compiled on different platforms. Now I'll move on to my next question, which is what are the advantages of using C#? Now there are a lot of advantages of using C# programming language, but one of the main advantages is scalability. So when you use C# as a programming language, or let's say you're developing a certain kind of software or writing a code for a server-side application, the end result is very scalable. Moving on, it is very simple and fast. As I had already repeated, the syntax is quite easy to understand, and the programming language or the platform itself is really fast. There's no buffering, and C# supports cross-platform. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says what are the different types of comments in C#? Well, majorly, C# supports only three types of comments, which are single-line comments, multi-line comments, and XML comments. The syntax of the same are given on the right-hand side. So to write a single line comment, you just have to press / 2 times and write your statement. Similarly, if you want to write a multi-line comment, you have to type a / with a special character star and then write your statement. And also when you're ending it, simply type / and end it with a special character star again. Now when you're writing an XML comment, simply type / 3 times and then write your statement. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says illustrate the process of code compilation in C#. Well, there exist 4 steps in the process of code compilation. One of the first step is compilation of source code. Second step is clubbing a newly created code. In order to make you understand this, let's say you have written a code which consists of certain functions. So what you got to do is, as a normal programmer or as a person who knows programming, you have to compile that code. But let's say you have created another set of functions to test that code. So you can club that newly created code into the already existing code. My third step is loading the CLR. Well, the word CLR basically means a common language runtime. And then finally, you got to execute the assembly through CLR. Now I'll move on and talk about the next question. So my next question is list down the access modifiers available in C Sharp. Mainly, C Sharp supports 5 types of access modifiers, which are public, private, protected, protected internal, and internal. So I'm going to be explaining you each of these access modifiers. So let me start off by public. Public basically means when an attribute or method is defined as public, it can be accessed from any part of code. So it can be accessed with a local variable or it can be accessed from the global variable also. Now let me talk about the private access modifier. Whenever a method is private or when there is a private attribute, it can be accessed from within the class itself. So let's say you have created a certain class under which you have defined a certain variable as private. Then whenever from outside that class, if you're trying to call it, that particular private keyword won't be called as it can be accessed from within that class itself. Now moving on, let me explain you about protected. Well, when a user defines a method or attribute as protected, then it can be accessed only within that class and the one inheriting that class. Now think of a very small example. Let's say a user has defined a class called parent and a user has also created a class called child, which is inheriting the properties of parent. So he can define certain variables as protected in that. So the child has all the rights to inherit those characteristics from his parent class. And that's how this whole protected access modifier works. Now I'll move on and talk about the internal access modifier. Well, I'm just changing the order. I'll be explaining internal first, and then I'm going to explain protected internal. An internal access modifier is an attribute or is generally an access modifier. When an attribute or method is defined as internal, then it will be accessed from that class at the current assembly position. All right. Now I'm going to be talking about protected internal. Well, when you define an attribute or method as protected internal, then its access is restricted to classes within the current project assembly or different types defined by that class. Moving ahead in C Sharp interview question, let's unfold some functionalities used in C Sharp. So my next question is, list down the different IDEs provided by Microsoft for C Sharp development. This is also one of my favorite questions because if you talk about Python, there are a lot of IDEs for Python. If you talk about Java, there are a lot of IDEs for Java. But C Sharp supports a wide variety of IDEs, starting from Visual Studio Express. Then, as you can see, I've mentioned in my slide, there's a Visual Studio Code, which is very general. Then there's a Visual Studio, or I can say a Visual Web Developer. There are also two things. One of them is a Mono Develop, and the other part is a Broxy, which was also developed by Microsoft. Now I'll move on and talk about my next question, which says distinguish between continue and break statement. Now this is also one of the important questions. Using break statement, you can jump out of the loop. So as you can see, I have given examples of programs in both the keywords, which are continue and break. So let me just explain you about break statement first, and then I'm going to explain you where is the break statement being applied. So moving on to the next question, which says distinguish between continue and break statement. Well, using break statement, you can jump out of the loop, while when you're using a continue statement, you can just jump over a certain iteration and continue the execution. For your better understanding, I have given an example of the program. So let's say when we talk about the continue statement, so I have given a program where I'm defining a lot of functions. Then I have created a class of continue statement. And then I'm going to call in the function that is public static void main string arguments, under which I have started with a for loop. And this for loop is running from I is equals to 0 till I plus plus. So if I is equals to 5, then I'm making use of a continue statement over here, which is going to run over this iteration and it is still executing. That is, the number is plus I will be executed. That is under console.readline. Now, when I talk about the break statement, so I have just changed the name under the class. So here I have named it as break statement, and I'm making use of the same for loop. I'm making use of the same if statement under for loop. Or when I write a break statement over here, so what it is going to do is it is simply going to jump out of this loop and execute the statement which is given, that is the number is plus I. But when I'm making use of the continue statement, it is just jumping out of certain iterations and it is again continuing the execution. Now I'll move on to the next question. So what are the different approaches of passing parameters to a method? Well, there are three ways of passing parameters to a method, which are listed over here. They are value, reference, and output parameters. Now let me explain all these parameters in detail. So when I talk about a value parameters, so under this method, the actual value of an argument is copied to the formal parameter of the function. That is, in this case, the changes made into the formal parameter of the function have no effect on the actual value of the argument. Moving on, when I talk about a reference parameter, so this method essentially copies the argument referring to the memory location into the formal parameter, meaning changes made to the parameter also affect the original argument. Now, when I talk about output parameters, this method simply returns more than one value. So it can return two values, three values, and etc. This was it with our beginner level C# interview questions. Now guys, I'm going to increase the complexity a little bit and also explain you about what are the most frequently asked intermediate interview question in C# programming language. So my first question is, distinguish between finally and finalize block. So when I talk about a finally block, well, finally block is called after the execution of try and catch blocks. It is used for exception handling. This block of code gets executed. So it is not dependent on the exception handling. Generally, this block of code has a more cleaner code compared to a finalized block. Now, when I talk about a finalized method or a finalized block, it is called just before the garbage collection. So the main priorities of a finalized block is to perform cleanup operation for unmanaged code. It is automatically invoked when an instance is not subsequently called. I have given a small example also. This is basically a syntax of try catch statement. So a statement goes under try and then you write an exception statement under catch and then the error occurs. I'm going to be explaining about try catch later in my tutorial. All right, so let me move on to the next question, which says, what is managed and unmanaged code? A managed code is the one which is executed by, again, the word CLR comes into picture, which means common language runtime. In simple terms, it means all the application code is dependent on the .NET platform. It is also considered as overseen in view of them. Now, when I talk about unmanaged code, it is any code that is executed by runtime application of some other structure different from .NET platform. The runtime of application will deal with memory, security, and other execution activities. So that was it with our managed and unmanaged code. Let me talk about a little bit of OOPS concepts. I'll be getting into OOPS concepts with what is an object, and then I'm going to be asking what is a class, and then I'm going to be explaining you about the various OOPS concepts. When I talk about object, object is an instance of a class. It is used for accessing the methods of a class. Now, this is a very pretty common question, guys, since C# is also an object-oriented programming language. When I talk about this picture over here, think of this as a blueprint of a house. Well, this picture is again repeated in the next question when I'm going to be explaining what is a class. Well, the house on the right hand side is basically an object of the blueprint of this picture, which is also called as part A. So this picture in part A basically depicts a blueprint of all the houses, that how a normal house should look like. And the picture in part B is an object. So this part B picture also denotes that it is an instance of a class. And in C#, new keyword is used for the creation of an object. And if I talk a bit more about object, then I can say that a class that creates an object in the memory location contains the information about methods, variables, and behavior of that class. Now I'll move on and talk about my next question, which says, what is a class? Now again, in this question, the same picture is repeated. Now just forget the B part. I'm going to be talking about the A part. As the definition of class says, a class is a blueprint of an object. It defines different kinds of data and functionalities objects will have. So this picture, that is the part A of this picture, is basically the blueprint of a house. So the picture in B is the object which defines that how a house should look like. So this blueprint part is called as the class. A class also enables you to create your own custom types by clubbing together different variables of different types, methods, and events. In C#, a class is defined by a class keyword. I'll move on to the next question, which says, define an abstract class. Well, It is a type of class whose objects can't be instantiated. It contains something like a single approach and is indicated by the keyword abstract. Now, the example what I've given over here is, guys, basically a GIF of a phone call. I can explain you abstract class so that you will be able to understand abstract class in a more comprehensive manner. Now, let's say you get a call from this man named Chris Wilson. So you have three of the options. Either you take up the call, or you cut the call, or you send a message, that I'll not be able to talk, or can I call you back later? But these are the only three reactions you can give whenever you're getting a call. But you don't know the method or mechanism which works behind when you're getting a call from this person, Chris Wilson, that how is this whole process taking place? Well, this is how an abstract method or the abstract keyword is defined. You are not told the process, but you're only told about the main method, that what you're going to do. And that's why the objects in this can't be instantiated, and it contains something like a single approach or technique. I'll move on to the next question, which says define sealed classes in C#. So the answer to this question is they are created, or you create sealed classes in situations when you want to restrict the class to be inherited. For doing this, basically make use of sealed modifiers. And if you forcefully specify a sealed class as a base class, then a compilation error occurs. Moving on to the next question, which says define a partial class. A partial class is the only one that essentially splits the definition of a class into multiple classes. It makes use of a split function. It also splits the definition of the class into multiple classes in either same source code files or multiple source code files. One can create a class definition in multiple files, but again, that is compiled as one class at runtime. And when an instance of this class is created, one can access all methods from every source file with the same object. It is also indicated by the keyword partial when you are trying to make use of partial classes in C# programming language. So when an instance of such a class is created, a user can access all methods from every source file. So these are the major functionalities of partial class, and this is what a partial class does, and this is what a partial class is. I'll move on to the next question, which is list down the fundamental OOP concepts. Well, there are four fundamental OOP concepts, guys, which are you must already be knowing if you're familiar with other programming languages, that are inheritance, abstraction, polymorphism, and encapsulation. I have explained each of these fundamental OOP concepts, which each of the examples given. Inheritance basically means, as you can see from a picture given here, this small guy is telling to his dad that, Dad, I'm a derived class, and his dad tells to his son that, Son, I'm a base class. You must have heard of this dialogue from relatives like, you look exactly like your father, mother. Well, the reason behind this is called as inheritance. From the programming aspect, it generally means inheriting or transferring of characteristics from parent to child class without any modification. The new class, which is this small little guy, is called as the derived class, and the one from which it is derived is called as a parent class, that is this dad. Now I'm going to be explaining you the next fundamental OOP concept, which is polymorphism. I have several examples of explaining polymorphism. Let me give you one example which is different from this. I'll be coming back to this also. You all must have used GPS for navigating the route. Don't you find it amazing that how many different routes you can come across for the same destination depending on the traffic? But from a programming point of view, this whole concept is called polymorphism. So I can say that it is one such OOP methodology where one task can be performed in several different ways. To put it in simple words, it is basically a property of an object which allows it to take multiple forms. So when I talk about operating system, so there are several operating systems which exist in the computer industry. We have Windows, Mac, Ubuntu. All right. So this is what polymorphism is. And when I talk about encapsulation, let me say in a raw form, encapsulation basically means you're binding up all the data in a single class. And a class shouldn't be directly accessed but be prefixed in an underscore. So that is one of the usage of encapsulation in OOP concepts. The data is being binded in a single class. So under this class, you have the method and the variable. When I talk about abstraction, so from this picture, what I'm trying to say is, suppose you booked a movie ticket from Book My Show, either using net banking or any other process. Now, again, I had explained you abstraction a while back. I'll be explaining you abstraction again, but with a different example so that it becomes crystal clear to you. So getting back to the topic. So you have booked a movie ticket using net banking or any other process. but you don't know how the procedure happens when a pin is generated or how your verification is being done. Well, from programming point of view, this part is called as abstraction. It basically means you only show the implementation details of a particular process, then you hide the main method or the details from the user. So it is basically used for simplifying complex problems by modeling classes appropriate to the problem. An abstract class cannot be instantiated, which simply means you cannot create objects for this type of class. It can only be used for inheriting the functionalities. Now moving on to the next question, explain the process of inheriting the class into another class. Well, this is quite a small question, guys. I'm just explaining you the process where one class is inheriting the properties from the parent class. In order to do this, colon is used as an inheritance operator in C#. You just place the colon and the class name. So you write the syntax like this, that is public class, derived class, and then you place the colon, and then you write the class name, that is the child class. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says define method overloading in C#. So if you guys have come across previous object-oriented programming language, or if you have studied about Java and Python, then you would have surely studied about method overloading and terms like method overriding too. So let me just explain you what method overloading means in C# programming language. Alright, so method overloading essentially means that you're creating multiple methods with the same name and unique signatures, but again with the same name and same class. So when you compile, the compiler will be making use of overload resolution to determine the specific method which will be invoked. Alright. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says list the differences between method overriding and method overloading. So the differences are given below. Under method overriding, the definition of derived class is changed, which in turn changes the method behavior. But in method overloading, you simply create a method with name and class being same, but has different and unique signature. Method overriding occurs between two classes, but method overloading is performed within a single class. Under method overriding, parameters must be different, but under method overloading, parameters must be same. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says explain streamreader and streamwriter class. Well, streamreader and streamwriter are classes of namespace.system.io. So they are used when we want to read or write a certain character or reader-based data respectively. Members of the streamreader are close, read, and readline, whereas the members of streamwriter are close, write, and writeline. So I've tried to explain the streamwriter and streamreader class through an example where I've created a test program, then under which I'm using this streamreader function. So under the I've opened a context manager under which I'm creating a function, or I can say an object with streamreader SR, and then instantiating new streamreader under which I'm calling in the file or the path of the file. Under this function, I'll be writing certain statement of code, and then I'll be closing it. Again, I'll be creating a function, and then I'll be instantiating this object, that is streamwriter SR is equals to new streamwriter. Now, if you guys look at these two lines closely, then you will find the familiarity of this programming language a lot with Java, because that's what you do in Java and that's how you do it in C++. So this is how it works. Most of the object-oriented programming languages have same way of, when you are instantiating an object or when you're creating a variable. And C# also uses few of the keywords of Java like public static void main, string arguments, etc., etc. So I'll move on to the next question, which says, what is an interface? Well, an interface is basically a class with no implementation. It contains only the declaration of the properties, attributes, and events. I'll move on to the next question now, which talks about distinguish between a class and a structure. When I talk about the differences between these two, class generally supports inheritance. Structure does not support inheritance. Class is passed by reference. Structure is a pass by value. Members in class are private by default, whereas members in structure or struct are public by default. Class is considered good for larger complex objects. So let's say you have created or you have written 2000, 3000 lines of code where you have not applied any functions. So that basically falls under procedural oriented programming language. So this is where the necessity of classes and objects and this whole object orientation or object oriented languages comes into picture. Whereas structure are considered good for small models. Now I'll move on and talk about my next question, which is list the differences between virtual and abstract method. A virtual method must always have a default implementation, whereas an abstract method doesn't necessarily have any implementation by default. Virtual method is overridden by the keyword override, whereas in abstract method, it forces the derived class to override the method. In virtual method, or when I talk about virtual methods, they have code. When I talk about this word, they have legit codes, whereas abstract method don't have their own actual code in them. So they reside under the abstract class, and also it is mandatory that the derived class must implement the abstract class. And again, use of override keyword is not necessary in this. I'll move on to the next question, which says illustrate namespaces in C Sharp. So in this question, I'm going to be explaining a bit about namespaces. So what happens is namespaces are used for organizing large code projects. Now, system is one of the most popular and widely used namespace in C Sharp. A user can create their own namespace and use one into another, and that is called as nesting of the namespace. So the basic definition is, suppose you have written a very large amount of code which consists of a lot of functions. So namespaces comes into picture over here. You can use it for organizing those large code projects. And system is again one of the most popular and widely used namespace. So I'll move on to the next question, which says define using statement in C Sharp. Well, using keyword simply denotes that the particular namespace is being used by program. For example, using system. So here, let's say I'm giving you an example of, I write this keyword using and then I write system. So when you're writing this using system, so here system is a namespace. As I had already explained you in namespace, that system is one of the most popular one. So system is a namespace. The class console is defined under system. So we can again use console.writeLine or readLine in our program. So that's how most of the using statement works. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says define an escape sequence, name a few strings in escape sequence. Well, an escape sequence is denoted by a backslash. The backslash merely indicates that the character it is following should be interpreted literally or it is a special character. Also, an escape sequence is a single character. Few of the escape sequences are as follows. They are new line character, you have a single quote, a backspace, and a backslash. So all these are your escape sequences. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says define boxing and unboxing in C Sharp. I'll start off by explaining you what is boxing. Well, when you're trying to convert a value type to reference type, then boxing comes into the picture. So let me just explain to you by giving you a small example over here. So let's say I have taken a variable value under integer form. So int value is equals to 10. And after that, I am making use of the boxing. So I have written a comment over here, under which I have created an object that is boxed value under object boxed value and instantiated value 1 or the pass parameter value 1 to this object. Similarly, when I talk about unboxing, so the explicit conversion of the same reference type, that is converting it back to the value type from the reference type, is called unboxing. Example of unboxing is I just write int because I'm going to be converting it back to the integer form. So it'll be int unboxing is equals to int, and under the context manager, I pass in the box value, which I had created earlier as an object in my first part. So I'll move on to the next question, which says define an array. Well, an array is used to store multiple variables of the same data type. The collection of variables are stored in a contiguous memory location. Now guys, array is one of the most important and one of the most commonly asked questions in interviews, because if an interviewer wants to check your basic knowledge of data structures or let's say computer science, most of the intermediate level questions would always start with arrays, because he just wants to know your concept that are you good with arrays, or how do you write programs, or how do you fit in arrays. So this is a small picture which I have given. So let's say these are the numbers. So these are under contiguous memory locations. An array always starts from the index 0, and these are the integers which are given over here. Now each index in the array holds a value. For example, array index 4 is holding a value of 200. So we have the numbers as 126, 32, 230, 21 and 200, and the values are starting from 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 0 is holding a value of 126, 1 is holding the value of 32, and subsequently that's how the array continues. This is basically a linear array where values are stored in a single row. My next question is define a jagged array in C Sharp. Well, a jagged array is referred to as an array of arrays. You can also call it as a nested array whose elements are arrays. The element of the same can be of different dimension and sizes. So it can be a multi-dimensional array or it can be any type of array. The length of each array can differ. So here I have given a small example, or I can say a syntax of a jagged array. So under which I have defined integer int jag array, wherein I'm instantiating new int, other array part is empty. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says distinguish between array and array list in C#. Well, there are several differences between array and array list. To start off, array uses the vector array for storing elements, whereas array list uses linked list to store elements. Size of array must always be defined. And when you talk about array list, there is no specific need for specifying the storage or specifying the size. An array is a specific data type storage. Array list can store everything as an object. Typecasting in array is not necessary, while typecasting is necessary when we talk about array list. There is no runtime exception in array, whereas there is a runtime error exception in array list. When I talk about array, elements can be inserted or deleted in between, whether it be the starting or the ending or the in between, whereas elements can't be inserted or deleted in array. Whereas when I talk about array list, elements can be inserted or deleted in between. Now I'll move on to the next question, which talks about define collections. So this is a straightforward question regarding collections. When I talk about collection, a collection essentially works like a container for instances of other classes. So every class implements collection interface. Yes, so that's it about collection. If you want to know more about collections or arrays or OOP concepts, I'll be dropping in the links of the blogs and the videos of Java collections, Java arrays or Python collection, Python arrays, Python OOP concepts in the chat box. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says write a short note on interface. Well, as I had already explained, interface is class with no implementation. It consists of a declaration of methods, parameters, and values. Now I'll move on to the next question. And also now I'm going to increase the complexity to one of the higher level. That is, I'm going to be discussing the advanced level interview questions, starting from illustrate serialization. So what is serialization? Well, serialization is a process that essentially involves converting some code into its binary format. Now, in doing so, it also gives the flexibility where code can be stored easily and or written to a disk or some other storage device. Serialization is used when there is a strict need for not losing the original code. Serialization is mainly of three types, guys. We have binary serialization, XML serialization, and there is a SOAP serialization. Now, let me explain you about each of these serializations. So, binary serialization is fast and it demands less space. It converts any kind of code into its binary format, serialize and restores public and non-public properties. When I talk about SOAP, it generally generates a complete SOAP compliant envelope used by any system by its ability to understand SOAP. So classes under this type of serialization reside under the namespace system.runtime.serialization. So classes mostly under the SOAP serialization type. Now my last type of serialization is an XML serialization. So it basically serializes all the public properties to XML document, readability being one of the prime factors. And XML document can also be manipulated in various ways. So classes under this type reside in system.sml.serialization. Again, if you want to know more about serialization in Java, you can check out our blog and videos. So you have to just ping your email ID in the chat box and our team will get back to you. So I'll move on to the next question, which says define parsing and explain how to parse a datetime string. Well, again, parsing is a method of converting a string into another data type. And I have given a small example over here. So let's say I am initializing the integer 200 to this variable called string text. So if I have to parse this, what code I'm going to write is integer.num is equals to integer.parse text. So in the above given example, 200 is an integer. So the parse method is basically converting the string 200 into its own base type, that is integer. Now, when you want to parse a datetime string, let me show you that by a small code. So what I've done is, here I have written the string datetime is equals to, the date is August 26, 2019. Now when I'm parsing this datetime, so I have created again a variable that is datetime parse value is equals to, I'm parsing this datetime that is into its original form. Okay, that is August 26, 2019. So this was it with parsing. Let me move on to the next question, which says define delegate. Delegate is a variable that holds the reference to a method. It is a function pointer of the reference type. All delegates are derived from the system.delegate namespace. Both delegate and the method that it refers to can have the same signature. Now let me show you that by a small example. Here what I'm doing is I am declaring a delegate by writing public delegate int mydel, and under that I'm writing int number, that is I'm passing that parameter. Then under which I have created a class program, and under that I have called a function. So a class program has the method same signature as the delegate called, under which I have defined integer difference is equals to a minus 10 and then just return this difference. Further which I have created a new function which is public void start, and then I have written my del delegate examples is I'm subtracting these numbers. So that's how a delegate works. So it is mainly a variable that holds the reference to a method. All right. So I'll move on to the next question. It says distinguish between system.string and system.text.string builder classes. Well, there are a lot of differences when I talk about these two. So the major differences are system.string is immutable, system.text.string builder is mutable. System.string can perform variety of operation. That is, whenever you modify the value of a string variable, then a new memory is allocated to the new value and previous memory allocation is released. System.text.string builder supports variety of operation. Now under the latter part, that is system.text, what happens is it is mutable. That is, it supports the fact that a variety of operations can be performed without allocating a separate memory location for the already modified and existing string. So these are the major differences between these two. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says illustrate the differences between system.array.copy2 and system.array.clone. For my ease and for your understanding, let me just call this as system.copy2 and system.clone, guys. All right, let me get to the differences now. When you're using the clone method, basically what happens is a new array object is created containing all elements of the original array. But when you're using the copy2 method, all the elements of the existing array gets copied into another existing array. So both use a shallow copy method. This is what the major differences are between these two. Now I'll move on to the next question. It says write the syntax for catching an exception in C#. So to catch an exception, we make use of the try catch block. Well, the catch block has a parameter of the system.exception type. Let me give you a small syntax. So I've given a small syntax here. Under try, we have, let's say I'm getting get all data, and then it will go to the catch method. That is, under catch, we'll have exception ex. And then if the error has to occur, then it will occur. Otherwise, if it passes this part, or this is what the syntax of a try catch block is. But let me just give you an additional knowledge on this. So if the error occurs after catch also, then probably your code is not functioning properly. If it doesn't, then it is out of the exception handling part. Most of the codes in object-oriented programming get into exception handling. Due to exception handling also, the performance or optimization of the code gets worsened. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says explain about generics in C#.NET. Well, generics are used to make reusable code classes which decrease the code redundancy. Okay, they increase the type safety, performance, and optimization. Using generics, a user can do a variety of things like create collections. Now to create generic collection, we make use of system.generic namespace. So the generic namespace should be used in spite of classes such as ArrayList in the system. Generic also provokes the usage of a parameterized type. All right, so this is it about generics. And I'll move on to the next question, which says list down the differences between finalize and dispose methods. Well, dispose is called when we want an object to release unmanaged resources with them. So dispose generally releases, or dispose basically releases unmanaged resources. Whereas finalize is used for the same purpose, but it doesn't give you assurance of garbage collection. This is one major difference between these two. So it doesn't assure you of the garbage collection of the object. And these are the differences between finalize and dispose methods. So now I'll move on to the next question, which says define C# IO classes and list the commonly used classes. So I'm now entering the file handling part of C#, guys. So C# consists of system.io namespace, which in turn consists of classes that compute various operations on file like creation of a file, deletion of a file, opening a file, and closing a file. All right. Few commonly used IO classes are listed below. which are streamwriter, streamreader, and file. I had explained you about streamwriter and streamreader before. I think now you'll be able to relate with it, even if any of you had some problem while understanding that part. So these are basically the commonly used IO classes in C#. Let me explain you about file, streamwriter, streamreader, and there are two more commonly used IO classes, which are string writer and string reader. So file basically helps in manipulating file. Stream writer is generally used for writing characters to a stream, whereas stream reader is generally used for reading characters to a stream. Now, when I talk about string writer, it is used for writing a string buffer. And when I talk about string reader, it is used for reading a string buffer. So these are the commonly used IO classes in C#. Now let me move on to the next question, which says, define thread, explain about multi-threading. Well, thread is a set of instructions that when executed enables the program to perform concurrent processing. By default, C# consists of only one thread. Now, when I talk about this keyword called, or this particular term called concurrent processing, so concurrent processing helps in doing more than one process at a time. By default, C#, I had already explained you, it consists of only one thread. Thread also follows a life cycle, that is where it starts whenever a thread is created and gets terminated immediately after the execution. When you execute more than one process or task at a time, then it is called as multi-threading. So this was it about multi-threading, guys. Threads are created by extending the thread class, and a start method generally marks the beginning of the thread execution. And now let me move on to the next question, which asks about what are events. So events in C# follow a concept where it consists of a publisher, a subscriber, notification, and a handler. So you can think of an event as nothing but an encapsulated delegate. So I've also given a small programming example here. So let's say I have created a function which is a public delegate void test event. Under that, again, I'm creating a function that is public test event one. So this is, you can think of this as a syntax of the event, or you can think of this as a normal function which I'm trying to call. So event is basically an encapsulated delegate. For your ease, I have already explained you about delegate, what it means, so you can relate to this part. And it consists of a publisher, subscriber, notification, and a handler. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says, explain synchronous and asynchronous operations. When I talk about synchronous and asynchronous operations, synchronization is basically or essentially a way of creating a thread safe code where only a single thread will access code in a given time. A synchronous call waits for completion of method and then continues the program flow. Synchronous programming also adversely affects the UI operations that normally happen when, let's say, user tries to perform time-consuming operations, since only one thread is being used here. Now, when I talk about asynchronous operation, the method call immediately returns, allowing the program to perform other operations, while the method called completes its share of work in certain circumstances. It is allowing the program to perform other operations while the method is completing its share of work. That's the condition which takes place in certain circumstances. Now I'll talk about the next question, which is explain async and await. Async and await keywords are mostly used for creating asynchronous methods in C#. Uses of the same is shown through an example here. So I have written a small code where I'm writing public async task is greater than the, let's say I've created calculate count. So I'm trying to calculate a count, and under which I'm writing this method that is await task.delay, and then under the context manager I'm passing the parameters 2000, and then I'm returning the value 1. So this is my code about async and await, and these are generally called for creating asynchronous methods. So I've already explained you about synchronous and asynchronous operations on methods, so you can basically relate with this part to that part. Now I'll move on to the next question, which says explain deadlock. So a deadlock is one of the most important part of operating systems. So a deadlock is a situation that arises when a process isn't able to complete its execution because two or more than two processes are waiting for each other to finish. Now this usually occurs, let's say, in multi-threading. In this, what happens is a shared resource is held up by a process, and another process is also waiting for the first process to get over or release that shared resource so that the second process gets. So in turn, what happens? This creates a long queue. Second one is waiting for the first one, third one is waiting for the second one, and the thread holding the logged item is waiting for another process to complete. So basically this creates a long queue, and this is when the situation of deadlock happens. Now let me move on to the next question, which says Illustrate race condition. Well, a race condition occurs in a situation when two threads access the same resource and try to change it at the same time. So the thread which accesses the resource first cannot be predicted. Now let me give you a very small example regarding this. Let's say we have two threads, x1 and x2, and they are trying to access the same shared resource called t. So we have x1, x2 and the shared resource t. If both threads try to write to the value to t, then the last value written to t will be saved. And all the values which had been written before t will not be saved. So that's how race condition works. Now I'll move on to my last question, which will also conclude my tutorial on top 50, or I can say the C# interview questions, which says, what is thread pooling? Well, a thread pool is a collection of threads that perform essentially tasks without disturbing the primary thread. Again, once the task is completed by a thread, it returns to the primary thread. So this was it with thread pooling, guys, and this also brings us to the end of today's session on C# interview questions. I hope you guys enjoyed today's session and learned something new. So I'll be coming up with more videos on different topics. Till then, stay tuned, take care, and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!